It doesn't really matter if you're just starting out with bow hunting or if you've been doing it for years.
Right.
That quest for like the best possible arrow penetration,
Yeah,
it's always there, isn't it?
absolutely. It's fundamental.
Yeah, like have you ever just looked at your arrows and thought, how do I get this thing to, really dig deeper, especially when it matters most?
Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into some really, really important research.
Okay.
It's Dr. Ed Ashby's 2007 study update, part 3. And this isn't just, a quick overview. No,
Yeah.
it's a deep look at arrow penetration, specifically focusing on two things: internal footings, or IFs, and this concept called extreme front of center, extreme FOC.
Okay, FOC. Let's make sure everyone's on the same page there. How does this study define these levels?
Good idea. So Ashby breaks it down pretty simply. Normal FOC is anything up to 12% weight forward.
Got it, 12%.
Then you've got high FOC, which is between 12 and 19%. But where it gets really interesting and what we're focusing on is extreme FOC. That's 19% or more.
19% plus. Wow, okay. So that's a serious amount of weight shifted towards the front of the arrow.
It really is. And our mission here in this deep dive is to pull out the key takeaways from Ashby's testing. It was pretty rigorous stuff.
So listeners can figure out what actually helps penetration.
Exactly. Whether you're just starting or you're looking to fine-tune an experienced setup, there's something here. And just for context, remember, these tests used longbows.
Right, specific draw weights.
Yeah, 82 pounds, 70 pounds, and 54 pounds, all tested at a 27-inch draw length. So keep that in mind as we go.
Okay, let's start with the heavy hitter, the 82-pound bow. Now, the study mentioned something interesting. Earlier tests, those extreme FOC arrows were just blowing right through targets, made measurements hard.
That's right. Complete pass-throughs were common, which, is great for hunting, but tricky for data collection. So for this part, they shifted focus a bit.
Oh, so?
They really wanted to test the durability of arrows built with internal footings, IFs, especially when combined with that extreme FOC.
Ah, so it was about toughness first. And all these arrows in this section had both IF and extreme FOC.
Correct. The initial tests were what Ashby called punishment shots, really designed to see if these arrows could handle extreme stress.
Punishment shots. Sounds intense. What were they shooting at?
Adult buffalo upper leg bones, specifically aiming at or just below the ball joint of the shoulder.
Whoa. That's about as tough a target as you can find on a buffalo, right? Short of the skull, maybe.
Exactly. Dense, unforgiving bone, the perfect test bed for durability.
And the arrows themselves. What was the setup for these IF tests?
Pretty stout. They used 100-grain brass inserts, steel broadhead adapters, and mostly those big 190-grain grizzly broadheads, all built for that extreme FOC balance.
Okay, so they hit them hard. What happened? Did the arrows hold up?
That's the key finding. They saw deep impacts, embedding in the bone, some really violent deflections when the angle was wrong, even chunks of bone getting knocked out.
Sounds like the arrows were taking a beating.
They were, but crucially, in every single one of those impacts, the internally footed shafts, the broadheads, the inserts, the adapters, everything remained completely undamaged, unscathed.
Wow. So that combination, the IF and extreme FOC, really proved its structural integrity. That's impressive.
It's a huge testament to that design, yeah. Really robust.
Okay, so the IFs passed the punishment test. What came next? More penetration focus.
Exactly. They moved on to more detailed penetration testing, but this time using one specific optimized arrow setup, still IF, still extreme FOC.
What was that specific arrow build?
It was a Carbon Express Heritage shaft, internally footed, a 100-grain brass insert, a 125-grain steel adapter, and a modified grizzly broadhead.
Okay, heavier setup.
Yep, total weight 790 grains. FOC was very high, 26.3%, momentum around 0.523 slug feet per second, and about 39 foot-pounds of KE.
26.3% FOC.
Yeah.
Definitely extreme. And the first test with this arrow was tough angles, scapula shots.
That's right. Adverse angle scapula shots. 6 of them, close range, 10 yards. But the shooting angle was tough, 45 degrees relative to the buffalo.
45 degrees. So the arrow's hitting the shoulder blade at a pretty steep angle then.
Yeah, the impact angle on the scapula itself was calculated to be around 37 to 38 degrees, which is, interestingly, getting close to the broadhead's theoretical skip angle.
The modified grizzly skip angle, so
Yeah.
you might expect it to glance off.
Potentially, yeah. Especially on a hard, flat bone surface like the scapula, it's a very challenging shot scenario.
So what happened? Did they skip? Or did they penetrate?
Well, this is where it gets really remarkable. Of the 4 shots that hit the flat portion of the scapula, 3 of them, 75% actually penetrated it.
75% penetration on that kind of angle. That's surprising.
It is, and the average penetration for all 6 shots was just under 10 inches, 9.96 inches.
Any specifics on those hits?
Yeah, 1 punched right through the scapula, hit a lung, and went over 14 inches deep. 2 others broke through the scapula and buried deep into the rib on the far side, 10.5, 11 inches plus.
Wow.
Only 1 actually stopped inside the scapular flat, and 2 lodged in the thicker scapular ridge. Think about that. A shot most would avoid actually yielded significant penetration.
What really jumped out at me reading that section was the note that in all of Ashby's previous tests, no other arrow shot at that severe 45-degree angle had ever penetrated the scapular flat on any size buffalo.
Exactly. That's a critical point.
Yeah.
It strongly suggests this specific combo, IF and extreme FOC, maybe with that modified grizzly, allowed the arrow to overcome what was previously thought impossible at that angle.
It really speaks to how it delivers force differently, doesn't it? Maybe keeping the arrow driving forward even on a glancing hit.
That seems to be the implication. So after that really tough test, they moved to something a bit more, well, conventional for hunting shots. Broadside, back of the shoulder.
Still using that same optimized 790 grain extreme FOC arrow.
Still the same arrow, yes. 6 shots, this time at 20 yards, aiming for the ribs behind the shoulder on mature bulls.
And these results were even better.
Oh yeah, very encouraging. 5 of the 6 hit the target zone, impacting only ribs. And incredibly, all 5 gave complete pass-throughs, exit wounds.
All 5 pass-throughs on Big Buffalo.
Every single one, which means the actual penetration was more than they could measure. The measurable depth averaged 22.5 inches.
22.5 inches measurable.
Wow. Yeah, the range was 19.25 up to nearly 25 inches, median almost 24 inches. Ashby used the phrase peas in a pod. They all went basically to the fletching, consistent, deep penetration.
That's the dream scenario for a bow hunter, right? Consistent pass-throughs, exit wounds, better blood trails, quicker recovery.
Absolutely. And then they compared this directly to their older data, which is where it gets really compelling.
Right, the 2005 data. For normal or high FOC arrows to get pass-throughs on similar rip hits on similar-sized buffalo, what did that take?
It generally required a much heavier arrow, around 900 grains on average, and impact momentum around 0.53 slug feet per second.
Okay, 900 grains. But these extreme FOC arrows were only 790 grains.
Significantly less mass, yes. And the impact force was basically the same, around that 0.52, 0.53 mark. Yet they achieved 100% pass-throughs with exit wounds.
That's a huge efficiency gain. Same impact force, much less arrow weight, but way better results.
Dramatic difference. And Ashby really drives this home. He states that no normal or high FOC arrow from any of their test bows had ever produced an exit wound on any shot angle on any size buffalo when the impact force was in this range.
And they had a lot of data points for that, didn't they? Something like 249 shots.
Yeah, 249 previous broadside, back of shoulder, rib-only shots with that same 82-pound bow. Included heavy arrows, fast arrows, all normal or high FOC, not a single exit wound among them.
That's just stark. It really highlights the potential difference extreme FOC makes.
It's the core argument, really, and Ashby proposes a reason for it.
What's the hypothesis?
He suggests extreme FOC helps the arrow conserve its force better during penetration. So you get more useful force actually doing the work, and it extends the time of impulse.
Time of impulse, meaning the arrow pushes for longer as it penetrates.
Kind of, yeah. It maintains its drive more effectively through tissue. It's not just about the initial hit, but how it sustains that energy.
That makes intuitive sense.
Yeah.
Less wobble, maybe.
Yeah.
More energy going straight forward.
That's part of the thinking. And then the study looks at how this interacts with other things we know help penetration, like the broadhead's mechanical advantage, or MA.
Okay, so how does MA fit in with extreme FOC?
What's really insightful is that the benefits of things like high MA seem to be magnified by extreme FOC.
Magnified? How so?
Well, if the extreme FOC arrow shaft flexes less on impact and during penetration,
Right, stays straighter.
then more of that forward momentum, that useful momentum, is available for the broadhead to actually use for cutting and wedging. The broadhead's efficiency isn't hampered by shaft flexing.
Ah, okay. So the better the broadhead design, higher MA, the more it can take advantage of that stable, forceful push from the extreme FOC arrow.
Exactly. The study suggests that the penetration increase you get from a higher MA broadhead is actually greater when it's on an extreme FOC arrow compared to the same broadhead on a normal or high FOC arrow, even if the initial impact force is similar.
It's like a multiplier effect then. Extreme FOC makes the broadhead work better.
That's a good way to put it. It acts like a catalyst, enhancing other penetration factors, a really key concept for building an effective arrow.
Definitely. Okay, so after these really impressive results with the optimized iExtreme FOC arrow from the 82-pounder, they did another test with that same bow, focused on the heavy bone threshold.
Yes, they wanted to revisit that idea of hitting heavy bone and see specifically if the degree of FOC mattered. Could they see a difference by just increasing FOC alone?
How did they plan to test that?
The idea was to use a similar broadhead, the Pro Big Game this time, and systematically increase the FOC by adjusting arrow weight. Interestingly, they used weed eater line inside the shaft to add weight incrementally.
Weed eater line. Huh, okay. Creative. So how did the initial lower FOC arrows in this specific test perform?
Well, not nearly as well as the previous iExtreme FOC setup. These initial arrows were lighter, 553 grains. They shot 4 broadside rib impacts at 20 yards.
And the results?
3 out of the 4 actually cracked the arrow shaft, failed to penetrate even the entry rib. They only got about 5 inches of penetration on average before breaking.
Ouch. Shaft failures. Not good.
Not at all. Only 1 of the 4 stayed intact, and that one did penetrate reasonably well, about 14 inches after getting through the rib.
But they couldn't continue this specific test progression.
No, they ran out of spare shafts because of those failures, so the plan to incrementally increase FOC got cut short.
Shame. But Ashby drew some conclusions even from that limited test.
He did. He noted that the low success rate penetrating even the entrance rib with these lighter mass non-IF extreme FOC arrows seemed consistent with earlier findings. It suggested that the challenge of heavy bone might still persist for extreme FOC arrows if the overall mass isn't sufficient.
So extreme FOC helps, but mass still matters, especially for bone.
It seems so. And he also mentioned they still hadn't fully determined how combining IF with extreme FOC specifically affects that heavy bone threshold. That remained an open question from this part.
Interesting. Okay, let's switch gears then. The 70-pound longbow tests. What was the goal there?
Well, the study notes this bow was, typical efficiency for older longbow designs, not a modern speed demon.
Okay.
The main idea was to test extreme FOC penetration in a setup where they were less likely to get constant pass-throughs, allowing for more measurable data.
Right, trying to avoid hitting that upper measurement limit like they did with the 82-pounder. What was the arrow setup for the 70?
Total mass was 756 grains. It used that same 190-grain grizzly broadhead we saw earlier.
Okay, the standard grizzly, not the modified one.
Correct. Standard 190 grizzly. Cabela's outfitter shaft, 100-grain brass insert, 125-grain steel adapter. FOC was still high, 27%. Momentum was a .477 slug feet sec. KE, just under 34 foot-pounds.
So similar FOC to the optimized 82 tag arrow,
Yep.
but a bit less mass and significantly less energy and momentum due to the lighter bow.
Exactly. And they took 9 broadside shots at 20 yards on large bull buffaloes.
How did those turn out? Any difference based on hit location?
Definitely. 3 shots hit low on the shoulder and struck leg bone.
Ah, the tough hits again.
Yep, one had a small shaft fracture right behind the insert, chipped some bone, and stopped in the far rib after about 10 inches. Another grazed the leg bone, deflected, but went through the near rib and into the heart, over 11 inches penetration there.
Hard shot, even with a deflection. Impressive.
It is. The third one hit the leg bone more squarely and just buried the broadhead about 6 inches deep right in the bone, over half the broadhead length embedded.
Okay, so hitting solid leg bone is still a major stopper, even with 27% FOC from the 70 tag bow. What about the other 6 shots? The rib hits.
Those 6 that hit back of the shoulder, ribs only, they performed much better. Average penetration was 15.65 inches.
15.5 inches average from the 70-pound bow. That's pretty good on big animals.
It is. The range was about 12 3/4 up to 19.5 inches. And importantly, all 6 reached the second lung.
Double lung hits.
1 was shallow in both. 3 were deep double lung hits. And 2 actually went all the way across the thorax, hitting the offside ribs.
Did they penetrate the offside ribs?
No, in both cases, they lodged firmly in the offside rib but didn't exit, so they traversed the chest but stopped at that final barrier.
Still, traversing the thorax on a big buffalo with a 70-pound longbow is significant penetration.
Very significant. And it's worth noting, like you said, even aiming for ribs, a third of those shots effectively reached the penetration barrier on the offside, which again kind of limits the maximum measurable depth.
Hints that there might have been even more potential there. So even with a lighter bow, extreme FOC was showing real promise.
Definitely. Which naturally leads to comparing the 70-pound results directly with the 82-pound extreme FOC results.
Okay, this is where the nuances come in, right?
Yeah.
Because the arrow setups weren't identical beyond the FOC.
Exactly. Big differences to remember. The 82-pound arrows had the internal footing, the 70-pound ones didn't.
And the broadheads were different. That's key.
Very key. The modified Grizzly on the 82-pounder's arrows had a mechanical advantage, MA, of 3.25. The standard 190 Grizzly on the 70-pounder's arrows had an MA of 2.75.
That's about an 18% difference in MA, right?
About 18.2% higher MA for the modified Grizzly. And the study reminds us previous tests showed that modified Grizzly gave about a 26% penetration boost over the standard Grizzly in normal FOC tests.
Okay, so IF versus no IF and a significant MA difference. How did the numbers compare overall between the two extreme FOC setups?
The 82-pound arrow was slightly heavier, about 4.5% more mass. It hit harder, about 9.6% more impact force. FOC was almost identical, 26 versus 27%.
Okay, slightly heavier, hits about 10% harder, same FOC range, but has IF and much higher MA. What was the penetration difference?
The measurable penetration from the 82-pound bow was almost 40% greater, 39.7% to be precise.
Wow, 40% more penetration from only 10% more impact force. That's huge.
It is, and the study argues this really highlights that amplified benefit of higher MA when combined with extreme FOC, the synergy effect we talked about.
Because that higher MA broadhead could take better advantage of the stable push from the extreme FOC arrow.
That's the conclusion. Even though the impact force difference wasn't massive, those 82-pound arrows retained enough energy to blow through the offside ribs and exit on those rib hits, something the 70-pound arrows couldn't quite do. That suggests much greater retained force than just the initial impact difference would imply.
Especially compared to how normal FOC arrows behave with similar force differences.
Exactly. They also mention a couple of minor factors. The 70-pound arrow shaft was slightly thinner, maybe a tiny bit less friction. The 82-pound arrow being heavier might have retained momentum slightly better, but
the big driver was likely the broadhead MA difference, amplified by the extreme FOC.
that's what the study concludes, yeah. That higher MA, coupled with the straight-tracking, momentum-conserving nature of extreme FOC, leads to that longer time of impulse, better force conservation, and ultimately that significantly deeper penetration. It's a compounding effect.
Fascinating. Really shows how the whole system works together. It's not just one single factor.
Precisely. Which brings us to maybe the most practical comparison for many hunters.
Which is?
Comparing the extreme FOC arrows from the lighter 70-pound bow against the normal and high FOC arrows shot from the heavier 82-pound bow.
Ah, okay. Seeing if optimized lighter tackle can beat heavier, less optimized tackle, how did they set up that comparison fairly?
They filtered the 82-pound bird data carefully. Looked only at shots using arrows 800 grains or less, no arrow failures, single blade broadheads only, and broadside chest hits behind the shoulder on similar buffalo, apples to apples as much as possible.
Okay, so what was the average penetration for those typical single blade shots from the 82-pound bow meeting those criteria?
Average penetration was just 9.83 inches, and the average arrow mass was around 736 grains.
Under 10 inches average from the 82-pounder with typical single blades.
Okay. Then they narrowed it down even more. What about just the shots from the 82-pound bow that used the exact same 190-grain grizzly broadhead as the 70-pound bow's extreme FOC arrows?
Okay, same broadhead now, just comparing 82 show tag normal high FOC versus 70 tag extreme FOC.
Right. For the 82-pounder using the 190 grizzly, average mass was lower here, about 692 grains. The average penetration improved to 12.15 inches.
Better, likely due to the grizzly's good MA and single-bevel design, as the study notes.
Probably, yes. That broadhead performs well. But now compare that 12.15 inches from the 82-pound bow
to the 15.65 inches achieved by the 70-pound bow, using the same 190 grizzly broadhead, but with the extreme FOC build and slightly higher mass, 756 grains.
Exactly. The difference is significant.
Let's break down those numbers. The 70-pound extreme FOC setup beat the 82-pounder with common single blades by a lot.
By 58.7% better penetration, according to the study's calculation.
58%. And even compared to the 82-pounder shooting the same grizzly broadhead.
The 70-pound Extreme FOC setup still penetrated 25.2% deeper on average.
That's incredible. A 12-pound lighter bow delivering 25% more penetration just by optimizing the arrow for extreme FOC using the same broadhead.
It's a really powerful finding. It starts to quantify just how much difference Extreme FOC can make in real-world performance, even acknowledging the measurement limits from pass-throughs.
The takeaway seems clear. Optimizing for FOC can potentially let you achieve better results with less bow weight.
That's certainly what the data suggests. A more manageable draw weight paired with a well-built Extreme FOC arrow could potentially outperform a heavier bow using more conventional arrows, at least in terms of penetration.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up. Key takeaways for everyone listening to this deep dive.
Well, number one has to be the significant positive impact Extreme FOC seems to have on penetration depth.
Right, and it doesn't just work in isolation. It seems to make other good things, like high MA broadheads, work even better. That synergistic effect.
Exactly. It enhances the effectiveness of other penetration factors, and maybe the most surprising point for some.
Is that potential to get superior penetration from a lighter draw weight bow if you really optimize that arrow for extreme FOC compared to a heavier bow with standard arrows?
That's a major implication, yes. But always remember Ashby's caution about mass.
Ah, good point. While the study looks at minimums and efficiency.
His consistent advice is always err on the side of more than just adequate penetration. Don't cut it too fine. You want overkill, really.
Absolutely. Margin for error is crucial. So the final thought for listeners to chew on.
Maybe look at your current arrow setup. After hearing about this, think. Could adjustments towards a higher FOC potentially maximize your arrow's useful force? Could it unlock deeper penetration potential?
Yeah, maybe time to explore FOC and broadhead MA a bit more in your own build. And hey, for those shooting lighter bows.
Stay tuned. Our next deep dive will get into the results from the 54-pound longbow tests in this same Ashby update. Some really relevant findings there, too.
Definitely something folks with lighter setups won't want to miss. Great stuff today.
Likewise. Lots to think about.